All right, so the next chapter we are going, or the next unit is kind of our personality chapter. So we wrapped up talking about this idea of development and how we develop cognitively, physically, and socially. But now we're going to look at this idea of the self. So just kind of as an overview, we're going to start with the Freudian or psychodynamic views of the unconscious parts of the self, which is really kind of this underlying, the stuff that you're not necessarily aware of. Then we're going to talk about the humanistic view of the self-actualizing person. Remember, this is kind of based off Maslow being the best you that you could be. And then we're going to look at kind of some more current personality research that talks about traits, including, the big five factors and dimensions, and how we've kind of taken all of this information we've gathered about the self and how can we put it into meaningful clusters. Then we're going to look at social and cognitive influences on personality because, of course, we can't forget any of all of these social factors that are out there, as well as our own unique cognitive abilities. And then we're also going to kind of take a look at self-esteem and self-serving bias and the way that this plays a role in how we look at ourselves and how others look at us as well. So we use these different perspectives and concepts to help us examine what we have in common, okay? So it's one of the things with personality. It's not only what makes us different, but it's also what makes us, what's in common. What are some basic personality components, drives, stages of development, categories of traits, those types of things. And then also, in what ways do we differ, okay? Individual paths through the same stages, ways of managing basic drives and needs that we all have, and how and why are we different, and then also the levels of the trait dimensions. Just because we have a specific trait doesn't necessarily mean that we're all going to experience and express that trait the same way. So what is personality? Okay, so our kind of general definition of personality is an individual's characteristic patterns of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, which persist over time and across situations. If we talk about our dwarfs, each of our dwarfs have kind of these, our stereotypical personality traits. We have agreeableness, openness, naivety, lethargic, kind of conscientious, neurotically irritable, sensitive and reactive, introverted. So we all have all of these different things, and this is what personality theorists aim to study. So the first theory that we're going to talk about is kind of this psychodynamic or psychoanalytic theory. And basically these theories of human personality focus on the inner forces that interact to make us who we are. So anytime you hear or see psychodynamic or psychoanalytic, you should automatically think unconscious mind, internal stuff. Okay, so in this view, behavior, as well as human emotions and personality, develop in a dynamic or changing, interacting interplay between conscious and unconscious processes, including various motives and inner conflicts. So all of the psychodynamic, psychoanalytic stuff is about stuff that's going on a very under the realm of awareness. We not necessarily know that it's happening. We don't necessarily know consciously that we think this way or feel this way, but it kind of bubbles up. And this will be clear when we kind of talk about how this came to be. So who was the first kind of person to deal with this? Well, good old Sigmund Freud and his path to developing psychoanalysis. So he started his career in Vienna as a physician. He was a neurologist, and he decided to explore how mental and physical symptoms could be caused by purely psychological factors. He became aware that many powerful mental processes operate in this unconscious level, meaning without our awareness. So anytime you hear unconscious, it means that we are not able to actively work with it. He also emphasized the effect of our childhood experiences on the development of personality. Freud really strongly believed that a lot of the stuff that happened in early childhood influenced how we turned out later in life. And this insight grew into a theory of structure of human personality and its development. So his name for his theory and his therapeutic technique. Okay, so this is really important because in psychology we refer to psychoanalysis in two different ways. One, we have the psychoanalytic theory, which is Freud's theory of personality. But then we also have his therapeutic technique, which is called psychoanalysis, which basically takes all of the basic building blocks of his psychoanalytic theory and then uses that. He developed that into a therapeutic technique, which we're going to talk about in the next unit. So psychoanalysis, basically, when he's talking about this idea of how do we get into this unconscious mind, he came up with some techniques for revealing it. Okay, he used things like free association, okay, which is basically encouraging people to speak whatever they came mind. Okay, and then the therapist verbally traces a flow of thoughts into the past and into the unconscious. Okay, he also suggested meanings for slip of the tongue, such as in this cartoon, for the latent content of our dreams. Okay, so again, Freud, when he was developing this psychoanalytic theory, these are some of the techniques that he used to try to uncover the unconscious mind. Because remember, he said everything was in the unconscious, we don't have conscious awareness of it. So then he had to figure out, well, how can we have access to it if it's not a conscious thing? And so free association was kind of the basis of a lot of his techniques. Now, how did he structure his personality? Well, he basically structured it kind of like an iceberg as a good way to visualize it. Okay, he believed that our unconscious energy resided in this thing called the id. Okay, and the id was this giant reservoir kind of completely out of our conscious mind. Okay, then we had the superego, and the superego is internalized ideals. These are the things that like society tells us that we should do. These are things like our morals and our values and our, all of that other kind of the ways that we should be. Okay, so one way to think about this is the id is kind of like the devil on your shoulder. Okay, and the superego is the angel on your shoulder. Okay, now the ego. Okay, the ego is the mediator. Okay, the ego is the one that says, okay, superego, sometimes we can't be perfect. Id, we can't be little devils all the time. And it tries to find a balance. Okay, it tries to make peace between the id and the superego. Okay, and so according to this model, Freud says that our personality develops from the efforts of our ego, our rational self, to resolve tension between our id, which is our biological drives, and the superego, which is society's rules and constraints. So again, he says our personality is our ego, right? It's kind of the ego's mediation between the two. The ego's saying that, we need to work in this reality principle. We need to be realistic about our expectations. We need to be realistic about our biological drives. We have to find balance. So, and again, the unconscious in Freud's view, a reservoir of thoughts, wishes, feelings, memories that are hidden from awareness because they feel unacceptable. Now, how does this lead to the developing personality? Well, we start life with a personality made up of the id, striving, impulsivity to meet basic needs, living by this idea of the pleasure principle. So the id very much is caught up with this idea of the pleasure principle. Kids, think kids, little kids. I want it now. You can't reason with them about something that they want right then and there. Okay? It's all about instant gratification for them. Okay? Now, in toddlerhood, we begin to develop an ego, a self that has thoughts, judgments, and memories, following what we call a reality principle, though it's still focused basically on serving the id's needs. Okay, it's just a little kind of more realistic about, okay, well, if I don't eat right at this moment, I'm not going to starve to death, so I can wait a few minutes. But that's still only a few minutes, not a long time. Okay, so he said then we start to learn delayed gratification. Okay, and then the ego then works as this executive of the three-part system to manage bodily needs and wishes in a socially acceptable way and reconciles the demands of the id and the superego. Now, around 4 or 5, though, this is when we start to develop the superego, a conscious, internalized from parents and society, following what we call this morality principle. Okay, so this is bigger. This is about bigger than just us. It's about society. Okay, so again, the id is the pleasure principle, the ego is the reality principle, and the superego is the morality principle. Okay, and the ego serves as the mediator between the two. Okay, so again, the superego, this idea of right and wrong. All right, so we're going to stop here. In the next video, we're going to pick up on Freud's theory of psychosexual stages.